Elderly billionaire finds waitress and her dog sleeping on trash. The truth broke his heart. What if the person you walked past every single day, the one you barely saw, was carrying a pain so deep it would change everything you thought you knew about being kind? That's exactly what happened to 42-year-old business owner Richard Caldwell on a cold November evening in downtown Chicago. He'd built his business on numbers, thinking clearly and making smart choices, but nothing could have prepared him for what he'd find behind Murphy's Diner. A sight that would break every idea he'd ever had about hard times and kindness. There, curled up against a pile of cardboard boxes, was Clara Martinez, the 36-year-old waitress who'd served him coffee every Tuesday for 2 years. Beside her, a golden retriever named Honey pressed close to stay warm, both of them fast asleep on what most people would call trash. Richard stood frozen, his breath visible in the freezing air, watching this woman who'd always greeted him with such respect, sleeping outside just yards from where she worked. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Richard had never really looked at Clara before. Not truly. She was simply the friendly face who remembered he took his coffee black, who always had his order ready before he reached the counter. Her smile seemed real, her uniform always neat, despite the long hours at Murphy's Diner. She'd been part of his Tuesday morning routine for nearly 2 years, yet he'd never wondered about her life beyond those short conversations. Murphy's Diner sat on the corner of State and Monroe, a simple place that served good food to working people who couldn't afford the fancy cafes downtown. Clara had worked there since she moved to Chicago, saving every penny she could while caring for Honey, the rescue dog she'd found limping in an alley 3 years ago. The veterinarian bills had been expensive, but Clara couldn't stand to let the gentle creature suffer. What Richard didn't know was that Clara had been living in her car for the past 6 weeks. The rent on her small studio apartment had jumped by $400, and despite working double shifts, she couldn't make up the difference. She tried everything, searching for a second job, looking for cheaper housing, even selling the few valuable things she owned. Her pride kept her from asking for help, and her fear of losing Honey kept her from going to shelters that wouldn't accept pets. The strange part wasn't lost on her that she served coffee to some of Chicago's richest people, while her own savings had shrunk to almost nothing. She'd started parking behind Murphy's because the area felt safer, and on really cold nights, when even the car felt too freezing, she'd make a bed from the clean cardboard the restaurant threw out. Richard stepped closer, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the frost-covered ground. In the dim light from the diner's back exit, he could see that Clara had covered Honey with her own coat, leaving herself with only a thin sweater against the November cold. Her hands, the same hands that had served him hundreds of cups of coffee, were red and rough from the cold. As he watched her sleep, something shifted inside Richard's chest. This wasn't some stranger he could walk away from. This was someone whose small kindnesses had been part of his life for 2 years. The understanding hit him like a physical blow. Clara had been struggling all this time, and he'd been completely unaware. Richard couldn't sleep that night. He kept picturing Clara's peaceful face as she slept against those cardboard boxes, how carefully she'd positioned herself to protect Honey from the wind. By morning, he'd made a decision that surprised even him. He was going to help, but he needed to understand the full situation first. The next Tuesday, Richard arrived at Murphy's earlier than usual. He watched Clara work, noticing things he'd missed before. The way she quietly saved the leftover rolls in a paper bag. How she drank a single cup of coffee throughout her entire shift. The real warmth she showed every customer despite what had to be bone-deep exhaustion. "Your usual, Mr. Caldwell?" Clara asked with that same bright smile, though now Richard could see the shadows under her eyes. "Actually, I was wondering if you might join me for a few minutes when you get a break," Richard said, his voice gentler than usual. "I'd like to buy you lunch." Clara's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, that's very kind, but I can't really take a long break during the lunch rush." "After your shift, then. I could wait." Something in his tone made Clara study his face more carefully. There was an honesty there she hadn't expected, but also something that made her stomach tighten with worry. "Is everything all right? Did I do something wrong with your order?" "No, nothing like that at all," Richard assured her quickly. I'd like to talk." When Clara's shift ended at 3, Richard was waiting at a corner booth. She approached carefully, still wearing her uniform, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. As she sat down, Richard noticed the careful way she positioned herself, as if ready to leave at any moment. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me," Richard began. "Are you all right? I mean really all right?" The question hung between them, and Richard watched as Clara's composure began to crack. Her eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "I saw you sleeping behind the diner Sunday night," Richard said gently. "You and your dog. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." Clara's face went white, then flushed with shame. She started to stand, but Richard reached across the table, not touching her, but creating a gentle barrier with his hand. "Please don't go," he said. "I'm not here to judge you. I'm here because I want to help." Clara sank back into the booth, her hands trembling as she tried to process what was happening. The secret she'd worked so hard to keep was out, exposed to someone who represented everything she couldn't afford. Success, security, choices. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not supposed to be this person. I'm supposed to have it together." "Tell me what happened," Richard said, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised them both. "Please." So Clara did. She told him about the rent increase that had come without warning, about choosing between keeping Honey and finding a place that would accept pets. She spoke of the shame of washing in the diner's restroom before her shifts, of the nights she'd lain awake in her car, wondering how she'd gotten to this point, despite working 60-hour weeks. "The worst part," Clara continued, wiping her eyes with a napkin, "is that I love my job. I love talking to people, making their day a little brighter. But I started avoiding eye contact because I was terrified someone would see how desperate I was." Richard listened without interrupting, feeling a deep shift in his understanding of what strength really looked like. Here was a woman who'd lost her home, but still showed up to work with a smile, who'd given up her own warmth to keep her dog comfortable. "Why didn't you ask for help?" Richard asked gently. Clara's laugh was bitter. "Ask who? I moved here from Arizona after my mom died. I don't have family, and I've been working so much I haven't had time to make real friends. Besides, what was I gonna say? Hi, I'm the waitress who can't afford a place to live." Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the table between them. "I own several apartment buildings in this area. There's a unit available in one of them, a one-bedroom with a small yard where Honey could run. The rent is reasonable and pets are welcome." Clara stared at the card as if it might disappear. "I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's a rental agreement with someone I trust to take care of the property. You'd pay market rate, but I can work with you on the security deposit. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments." Clara picked up the card with shaking hands, reading his name printed in elegant letters. Richard Caldwell, Caldwell Properties. The Tuesday morning coffee customer was offering her a lifeline, but accepting it meant swallowing her pride in a way that felt impossible. The apartment was on the second floor of a renovated brownstone with hardwood, floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot, and windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. Clara stood in the doorway, afraid to step inside, afraid this kindness might disappear if she moved too quickly. "The previous tenant left some furniture," Richard explained, gesturing toward a comfortable couch and a small dining table. "You're welcome to use it or replace it, whatever feels right to you." Honey trotted past both of them, immediately claiming a sunny spot near the window, as if she understood this might be home. Clara watched her dog settle with a happy sigh, and something inside her chest loosened for the first time in months. "Why are you doing this?" Clara asked, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't even know me." Richard was quiet for a moment, looking out at the small courtyard where other tenants had planted flowers and hung bird feeders. "My father worked 3 jobs when I was growing up. He never complained, never asked for help, and I thought that made him weak. It took me years to understand that he was the strongest person I knew." He turned back to Clara, his eyes serious but kind. "You've been showing that same strength every day. You just couldn't see it because you were too busy surviving." Clara walked to the window where Honey lay, basking in the sunlight. The dog's tail thumped against the floor, and for the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't involve anxiety and constant counting of every penny. "I'll pay you back," she said finally. "Every cent of the deposit, every favor. I don't know how yet, but I will." "The only thing I want in return," Richard said, "is for you to keep being exactly who you are. Your kindness has been a bright spot in my Tuesday mornings for 2 years. That matters more than you know." That evening, Clara made Honey's dinner in a real kitchen for the first time in 2 months. She sat on the floor beside her dog, both of them surrounded by the last of the moving boxes Richard had helped carry up the stairs. As the sun set through those big windows, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. She pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in years. She called in sick for her Tuesday morning shift just this once, so she could wake up slowly in a place that was truly hers. Months later, Clara arrived at Murphy's Diner for her Tuesday morning shift to find Richard waiting at his usual table, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, and across from them a young man who couldn't have been more than 16. "Clara, I'd like you to meet my mother, Helen, and my son, Jake," Richard said as she approached. "Mom's visiting from Portland, and Jake's on spring break from prep school." Clara felt a familiar flutter of nervousness, but it was different now. The anxiety of wanting to make a good impression, not the panic of trying to hide her circumstances. "It's wonderful to meet you both. What can I get you started with?" "Actually," Helen said with a warm smile, "Richard's told us so much about you. I was hoping we might chat for a few minutes when you have time." During her break, Clara joined them at the expanded table. Helen reached across and patted Clara's hand. "I wanted to thank you for the kindness you've shown my son. He's told me how your smile used to be the best part of his Tuesday mornings, even when you were going through such a difficult time." Jake, who'd been quietly listening, looked up from his phone. "Dad said you're the reason he started paying attention to people, instead of just rushing through his day." "That's pretty cool." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different tears now. Tears of thankfulness rather than desperation. "Your father saved my life, you know, not just with the apartment, but by reminding me that asking for help isn't giving up." Richard shook his head. "We helped each other. I was so focused on building wealth that I forgot what it was for. Watching your grace under pressure reminded me that real success means being present for the people around you." As Clara walked them to the door after their meal, Richard handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a silver picture frame containing a photo she didn't recognize. Herself and Honey on the day they moved into the apartment, both of them grinning in the sunshine. "You took this?" she asked, surprised. Jake did, actually. He wanted to document what courage looks like. That evening, Clara placed the photo on her kitchen windowsill right next to the herbs she'd started growing and a thank you card from the literacy program, where she'd begun volunteering on weekends. Honey stretched across the couch that had become her favorite napping spot, and Clara sat beside her, watching the sunset paint their home in shades of gold. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest acts of noticing. A cup of coffee served with real warmth, a moment of vulnerability shared between strangers, the choice to see dignity in unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, kindness has a way of finding its way back to us when we least expect it.